Welcome back to AI Draws Stories. Tonight, our pen plotter will slowly bring Singapore to life, one line at a time. As the Merlion watches over Marina Bay Sands rises into the clouds. The Singapore flyer turns above the skyline, and the Supertrees begin to glow. I'll tell you a story about a grandfather's final wish, a city built through determination, and a lesson hidden in plain sight. This is the Merlion's promise. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Old Photograph. Rain tapped softly against the windows of Daniel Mercer's apartment. He sat at his kitchen table surrounded by boxes. 3 weeks earlier, his grandfather had passed away at 92 years old. Most of the belongings had already been sorted. Old clothes, fishing rods, family albums, a broken watch, several tools. Nothing unusual. Until Daniel opened a small cedar box, hidden beneath folded blankets. Inside rested 3 objects: an old brass compass, a black and white photograph, and a sealed envelope. Daniel picked up the photograph. It showed a much younger version of his grandfather standing beside a strange statue. The statue had the head of a lion, the body of a fish. Water poured from its mouth into a harbor. Behind it stood ships, cranes, small buildings. No Marina Bay Sands, no flyer, no Supertrees, only open water. On the back of the photograph was written, Singapore, August 1965. Daniel frowned. His grandfather rarely spoke about Singapore. Only once had he mentioned it. Daniel had been 14. They were sitting on a porch, watching birds land in a nearby tree. His grandfather smiled. Some places teach you how to make money. Some places teach you how to survive. And a few places teach you how to believe. Daniel asked him which one Singapore was. His grandfather answered, Singapore taught me hope. Daniel never forgot that. He opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. Daniel, if you are reading this, I have already taken my final journey. There is something I wanted to show you. Not money, not treasure, something better. Take the photograph, take the compass, go to Singapore, stand where the lion watches the sea. Wait until sunrise. Someone will find you. Trust them. And remember what I always told you. The tallest buildings are never made from steel. They are made from people. Grandpa. Daniel read the letter twice. Then 3 times. His grandfather had never been a storyteller. He repaired engines, built cabinets, fixed plumbing. He believed in practical things. Yet here he was, leaving clues, sending Daniel halfway around the world. Daniel looked at the photograph again. The lion, the sea, Singapore. Maybe this was his grandfather's final adventure. Maybe it was simply a way to say goodbye. Either way, Daniel booked a ticket. 2 days later, his plane descended through clouds. Below stretched one of the busiest ports in the world. Hundreds of ships waited offshore. Tiny lights sparkled across the water. Palm trees lined roads. Glass towers reflected the morning sun. Singapore looked clean, quiet, organized, almost futuristic, yet somehow welcoming. As Daniel stepped into Changi Airport, he immediately noticed something different. No trash, no graffiti, no shouting. People moved calmly, efficiently, like everyone knew exactly where they were going. Daniel smiled. His grandfather would have loved this place. Outside, warm, humid air wrapped around him. Birds chirped from nearby trees. Taxi drivers waited patiently. Flowers bloomed beside walkways. It felt more like a garden than a city. And somewhere ahead, a lion waited. Chapter 2. The Lion That Watches. Daniel arrived at Merlion Park before dawn. The city was still waking up. Joggers moved along pathways. Couples took photographs. Workers swept sidewalks. Small boats crossed Marina Bay. Then Daniel saw it. The Merlion. White, majestic, endlessly pouring water into the bay. The photograph matched perfectly, except everything around it had changed. Skyscrapers rose in every direction. The bay was larger, modern, Beautiful. Daniel walked closer. He compared the old photograph with reality. His grandfather had stood exactly here, 60 years earlier, when Singapore was barely a nation. And now, millions of visitors came every year. Daniel sat on a nearby bench, compass in hand, watching sunrise paint the sky orange. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Nothing happened. No mysterious stranger. No hidden envelope. No clue. Daniel laughed softly. Maybe Grandpa had simply wanted him to visit Singapore. Maybe there was never a mystery. Then someone spoke. Your grandfather sat there too. Daniel turned. An elderly man stood nearby, thin, neatly dressed, holding a small bag of birdseed. Pigeons gathered around his feet. You knew him? The man smiled. Very well. He talked too much. Daniel laughed. Sounds accurate. The man sat beside him. My name is Wei Ming. I worked with your grandfather. Daniel looked surprised. In Singapore? Wei nodded. 1965. Construction crew. We built roads, carried concrete, planted trees, fixed pipes, whatever needed doing. Daniel looked toward the Merlion. What was he doing here? Wei smiled. He believed Singapore would become something impossible, and everyone laughed. Daniel asked, why? Wei pointed toward Marina Bay. Because none of that existed. Daniel followed his finger. Towering in the distance stood 3 massive buildings, connected by a giant platform. Marina Bay Sands. Nearby rested a white structure shaped like a flower. The ArtScience Museum. Farther back, a giant will touch the clouds. The Singapore Flyer, and beyond them, strange metal trees rose into the sky. The Supertrees. Wei chuckled. When your grandfather arrived, there was mostly water. No towers. No gardens. No wheel. No luxury hotels. Only fishermen. Warehouses. Small houses. And dreams. Daniel remained quiet. Wei reached into his pocket. He handed Daniel another envelope. On the front, Daniel Mercer. Written in familiar handwriting. Grandpa. Inside rested another note. To understand Singapore, first look upward. Find the 3 towers. That is where our story truly begins. Daniel smiled. His grandfather was still sending him on scavenger hunts, even from beyond the grave. Wei stood. Meet me tomorrow. At Marina Bay Sands. Daniel asked, why are you helping me? Wei smiled. Because I made a promise. To your grandfather. We said one day we would show our grandchildren what ordinary people built. He tossed more seeds. Birds gathered around him. Then he walked away, leaving Daniel staring at the Merlion. Water still pouring endlessly into the bay. Watching, waiting, guarding memories, just as it always had. Chapter 3. The 3 Towers. The next morning, Daniel stood beneath Marina Bay Sands. He tilted his head upward. 3 enormous towers climbed toward the sky. Above them rested what looked like a ship floating in midair. Tourists snapped photographs. Families laughed. Children pointed upward. Daniel shook his head. Grandpa was right. This place looked impossible. Wei arrived carrying 2 coffees. You know, Wei said, when they announced this project, people said it could never be built. Daniel accepted the coffee, kind of like Singapore itself. Wei smiled. Exactly. We became independent in 1965. No natural resources. No oil. No gold. No farmland. No large rivers. No big military. Many people thought Singapore would fail. Daniel looked around. It doesn't seem like failure. Wei laughed. No, not at all. Wei pointed toward the towers. Your grandfather visited every year. He watched these buildings rise. he called the monuments. Daniel asked, "To what?" Wei looked toward the bay, to determination, to discipline, to people refusing to give up. Daniel suddenly understood. This wasn't another Silver Ace. No hidden tunnels, no lost ledger, no criminals. His grandfather wasn't showing him treasure. He was showing him possibility. And perhaps that was even more valuable. Chapter 4. Singapore, 1965. Daniel never knew much about his grandfather before he became a grandfather. To Daniel, he was simply Grandpa, the man who fixed everything, the man who could sharpen a knife in 30 seconds, the man who grew tomatoes that somehow tasted better than anyone else's. But now Daniel imagined him differently. 24 years old, sweating beneath the tropical sun, stepping off a ship into Singapore for the first time. The city looked nothing like it did today. No Marina Bay Sands, no flyer, no Supertrees, no Skyline, only cranes, warehouses, fishing boats, street markets, wooden houses, construction sites, and people, thousands of people trying to build better lives. Grandpa rented a small room with 3 other workers, 1 fan, for beds, 1 bathroom, no air conditioning, no television, no telephone. Yet every night they laughed, played cards, shared meals, talked about what Singapore might become. Most believed it would struggle. Some believed it would survive. Only a few believed it would thrive. Grandpa belonged to the last group. One evening Wei asked him, "Why are you so optimistic?" Grandpa smiled. "Because I see people working. I see children studying. I see streets being cleaned. I see neighbors helping neighbors. That matters." Wei laughed. "You think too much." Grandpa grinned. "Maybe. But I think someday people will come from around the world just to visit here." Everyone laughed. Tourists? In Singapore? Impossible. At least, it seemed impossible then. Chapter 5. The Lotus. The following morning, Daniel met Wei near the ArtScience Museum. The building appeared to float above the water. Its white petals stretched toward the sky. Tourists stopped every few seconds to take photographs. Daniel tilted his head. "It really does look like a lotus." Wei smiled. "When this museum opened, your grandfather visited almost every year." "Why?" Wei laughed. He liked what it represented. "What do you mean?" Wei pointed upward. "People see architecture. Your grandfather saw cooperation. He used to say, 'No one builds something like this alone.' He believed every building had invisible fingerprints." Daniel looked confused. Wei continued. "Engineers, architects, concrete workers, electricians, painters, gardeners, truck drivers, people whose names nobody remembers. But without them—" Wei gestured toward the museum. "Nothing." Daniel nodded. His grandfather always respected workers, even after retiring. He thanked cashiers, talked to janitors, complimented landscapers. He noticed people others overlooked. Wei reached inside his jacket. Another envelope. Daniel laughed. "There really is an endless supply of these." Wei grinned. He prepared them years ago. Daniel unfolded the letter. "Daniel, most visitors only see the finished building. But every finished building contains thousands of unfinished stories. People miss birthdays, work overtime, stand in heat, spend months away from family, all so strangers can someday admire beauty. Remember that, Grandpa." Daniel folded the paper carefully. Maybe Grandpa wasn't teaching history. Maybe he was teaching gratitude. Chapter 6. The Giant Wheel. The Singapore flyer rotated slowly above Marina Bay. Daniel stepped inside the capsule. Air conditioning hummed softly. Families smiled. Children pressed their faces against glass. The city grew smaller beneath them. Roads looked like ribbons. Cars became toys. Ships resembled tiny floating blocks. Wei stood beside Daniel. When your grandfather first came here, there were no giant wheels. Daniel smiled. There wasn't much of anything. Wei laughed. Exactly. But that's why he loved Singapore. Every visit felt different. Every year something improved. They continued rising. Marina Bay Sands dominated the skyline. The Lotus gleamed white. The Merlion appeared tiny. Clouds drifted overhead. Birds crossed beneath them. Daniel whispered, "It's beautiful." Wei nodded. Beauty isn't accidental. It requires planning, discipline, patience. People forget that. Daniel remembered his grandfather building a birdhouse. He spent 3 days sanding tiny edges, painting details, perfecting it, not because anyone would notice, but because he cared. Maybe Singapore was similar. Millions of people caring. For decades, building something extraordinary. Chapter 7. Stories above the bay. Wei pointed toward neighborhoods stretching into the distance. You see those apartment buildings? Daniel nodded. Public housing. Wei smiled. Nearly everyone thought public housing would fail. But Singapore invested in families, schools, parks, transportation, hospitals. Daniel looked surprised. It seems obvious now. Wei laughed, only because it worked. When your grandfather arrived, people shared rooms. Some homes had no running water, no air conditioning, no elevators, but people adapted. And eventually, life improved. Daniel realized his grandfather wasn't showing him monuments. He was showing him progress. Slow, steady, human progress. Chapter 8. Trees of Steel. Night arrived. Gardens by the bay transformed. Music drifted softly through hidden speakers. Then lights appeared. Purple, blue, green, gold. The Supertrees awakened. Thousands gathered. Children danced. Couples hugged. Families pointed upward. Daniel stared. The structures looked alive, almost magical. Wei chuckled. Your grandfather laughed the first time he saw these. Why? He said engineers secretly want to become artists. Daniel laughed. That sounds exactly like him. Wei smiled. He believed beauty matters. Even practical people need beauty. Daniel remembered Grandpa planting flowers beside his garage. Bird feeders, wind chimes, small things, simple things. Maybe beauty wasn't luxury. Maybe beauty was necessary. Chapter 9. Music among the trees. The Garden Rhapsody show began. Lights traveled upward through metal branches. Purple, pink, red, blue. Golden sparks danced overhead. Music echoed around the gardens. Visitors fell silent. Everyone simply watched. Daniel looked toward Marina Bay Sands, toward the flyer, toward the skyline. Everything glowed. Everything felt hopeful. Wei spoke softly. When your grandfather first arrived, there were swamps here. Daniel looked surprised. Really? Wei nodded. Swamps. Mud. Fishing villages. No skyline. No gardens. No music. Daniel smiled. Hard to imagine. Wei nodded. Exactly. That's why he wanted you here. So you could see. Impossible things happen when enough people refuse to quit. Chapter 10. Hawker Stories. The following afternoon, Wei invited Daniel to lunch. They walked several blocks before arriving at Maxwell Food Center. Steam rose from food stalls. People lined up patiently. Workers ate beside businessmen. Tourists sat beside elderly couples. No one seemed rushed. No one seemed concerned about status. Everyone simply came for good food. Daniel smiled. This feels different. Wei laughed. It is. Singapore doesn't only build skyscrapers. It builds communities. Daniel looked around. People talked. Families laughed. Friends shared meals. Children chased each other between tables. What should I try? Daniel asked. Wei grinned. Chicken rice. Your grandfather loved it. Daniel laughed. What didn't he love? Wei thought. Durian. Daniel burst out laughing. Really? Wei nodded. He called it garbage fruit. Daniel nearly spit out his drink. Both men laughed. For a moment, it felt less like history and more like family. Wei became serious. Food tells stories. Daniel listened. Chinese immigrants, Malay families, Indian workers, European traders. People brought recipes. Generations improved them. And eventually, we created something uniquely Singaporean. Daniel looked around again. Maybe cities were like recipes. Different ingredients, different backgrounds, different people, combined together, creating something impossible to duplicate elsewhere. Chapter 11. The Man in the Photograph. That evening, Daniel and Wei returned to Marina Bay. The sky glowed orange. Clouds drifted overhead. Ships waited patiently offshore. The flyer turned slowly. Marina Bay Sands reflected sunlight. Daniel removed the old photograph. Then he noticed something. He had missed it before. There were 5 people standing beside the Merlion. Not just Grandpa. Wei was there too. And 3 others, covered in dirt, smiling. Construction helmets resting nearby. Daniel showed Wei. Wei smiled. That was taken 3 weeks after independence. Daniel studied the faces. Everyone looked hopeful, even though they owned almost nothing. What happened to everyone? Wei sighed. 1 returned to Malaysia. 1 moved to Australia. 1 passed away years ago. And your grandfather? Wei smiled. He never forgot Singapore. Daniel nodded. He never talked about it much. Wei chuckled. He didn't need to. Some places become part of who you are. Daniel understood. Singapore changed Grandpa, not because of wealth, not because of opportunity, but because he watched an entire nation decide its future and succeed. Chapter 12. Grandpa's Final Letter. Wei reached into his pocket. 1 last envelope. Daniel laughed. Seriously? Wei smiled. The last one. Daniel carefully unfolded the paper. Daniel, if you've reached this point, then you've finally seen Singapore. Not just buildings, not just gardens, not just attractions. You've seen an idea. People often search for treasure, gold, jewels, ancient maps, secret rooms. But the greatest treasure I've ever discovered was watching ordinary people accomplish extraordinary things. Singapore taught me that. I hope it teaches you too. People built these towers. People planted these gardens. People cleaned these streets. People educated children. People cared enough to believe tomorrow could be better. And because they believed, millions benefit today. I wanted you to understand that. Because your generation inherited beautiful skylines. Never forget someone stood in the rain. Someone worked overtime. Someone missed birthdays. Someone sacrificed. Just so strangers could someday enjoy beauty. Treasure fades. Buildings age. Money disappears. But hope survives. Love. Grandpa. Daniel lowered the letter. Neither spoke. Music drifted from gardens by the bay. Birds crossed the sky. Clouds turned pink. The city seemed peaceful, almost perfect. Chapter 13. 1 last sunrise. Daniel woke before dawn. He returned to Merlion Park. Alone. The city remained quiet. Few tourists had arrived. Few workers had started their day. The Merlion stood proudly. Water poured endlessly into Marina Bay. Daniel sat on the same bench, compass in hand, photograph resting on his lap. Slowly, sunlight touched Marina Bay Sands, then the flyer, then the lotus, then the Supertrees, then the skyscrapers. Everything awakened. Everything glowed. Daniel smiled. His grandfather never intended this to be a mystery. There was no hidden vault, no lost fortune, no secret society, only a lesson about gratitude, determination, patience, and believing impossible things can happen. Daniel whispered softly, "I understand now." A gentle breeze crossed the water, almost like someone answering. Chapter 14. The Merlion's Promise. Hours later, Daniel loaded his suitcase into a taxi. Wei stood nearby, hands in his pockets, smiling. Daniel shook his hand. "Thank you." Wei smiled. "No, thank your grandfather." Daniel laughed. "I will." Wei pointed toward Marina Bay. "Do you know why people love Singapore?" Daniel thought. "The skyline." Wei shook his head. "The gardens." "No." "The food." "No." Wei pointed toward a nearby family. Grandparents, parents, children, laughing together, because people believe tomorrow can be better, and that belief changes everything. Daniel smiled. "The Merlion doesn't guard treasure." Wei grinned. "No, it guards hope." Daniel climbed into the taxi. As it drove away, he looked back one final time. The Merlion watched over the bay. Marina Bay Sands reached into the sky. The flyer turned slowly. The lotus glowed white. The Supertrees stretched upward. Birds crossed the clouds. Ships waited offshore. And Daniel finally understood. Las Vegas had hidden secrets. Singapore had hidden inspiration. And somewhere else in the world, another city was waiting. Another story. Another lesson. Another journey. Daniel leaned back, closed his eyes, and smiled. Because some places teach you how to make money. Some places teach you how to survive. But a few places teach you how to believe. The end. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of the Merlion's Promise. I hope you enjoyed watching Singapore come to life while following Daniel's journey through one of the most remarkable cities in the world. If you liked this combination of real-time pen plotting and storytelling, let me know in the comments. I'd love to create more adventures like this in cities around the world. Maybe next we'll uncover hidden memories in Tokyo, search for lost letters in Paris, walk through history in London, or discover forgotten dreams in New Orleans. Thanks for watching AI Draws Stories, and I'll see you in the next drawing.